met her also at the Peabody Conservatory.
That's right.
So this piece, Fire Balloon, one of like the first things we figured out in working on it is that a fire balloon is a hot air balloon.
Took us a really long time.
It's too long to realize.
Okay, this is like a balloon.
We need to talk about why fire balloons, where does that come from?
Well, when I grew up in the Midwest, and when I was a little girl, we had a tiny little house up in the suburbs of Chicago, and it was not far from a hot air balloon launching pad. And my family didn't have any money, and so we went on Saturday mornings to watch the hot air balloons take off. And I just remember being so kind of taken with them. I actually never ridden in one, but one of the strongest memories I have is just playing in the backyard, and you can actually hear hot air balloons long before you see them. And so you'll hear this, and then silence. And as soon as I just remember being, okay, where is it? And looking through the trees and trying to see, this burst of color was going to come at some point, and so just kind of waiting for it and seeing this amazing, colorful pattern in the middle of the sky it's a very strong memory. So when I was thinking about, I wrote a poem that uses this as a metaphor for kind of discovering love, and so the surprise of that sometimes, and how beautiful it can be to just be struck by someone who is so colorful, and that's kind of where the whole piece is coming from.
Was the poem written as something separate? Like, well, before
Totally,
you were writing?
yeah.
So when
I wrote the
was
poem in 2006, I think, or 2007. And then when you asked me for the piece, actually I've been thinking about, because the text is very repetitive, and so I've been thinking, really want to make this poem into a piece of music, because I think there's a real kind of musicality, rhythm to it. And so when we talked about a piece, I immediately thought of that. I think a lot of it had to do with the sound that was in my head of the hot air balloon, and the idea that both of you are breath instruments, and that's a very kind of natural association.
The other composers, we asked them to sort of look at this theme of childhood and loss of innocence. I don't remember if we told that specifically to you.
No, wow.
Well, to fully describe, like we started working with the other three composers ahead of time, and then we got enough funding that we're like, let's commission someone else. And
So this is the only piece that's not on our CD.
bonus downloads.
And we just met up with Amy a few weeks ago to do a coaching, and she was staying at Aaron Copeland's house, which has been turned into a residence for composers. And we got to play her the piece before we took it out into the world. And I just wanted to ask you, is there anything in hearing the piece for the first time, is there anything that struck you as either wildly different in our actual performance of it than you had imagined, or just amazingly perfect?
Compliment us.
What's the difference in terms of what you hear in your head versus then what we show up?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I'm a singer, and so there weren't any surprises. I don't remember any surprises. Yeah. I was surprised with how good your singing and playing is. I wasn't sure how that was going to go, but he has a very lovely.
There's these points where I'm singing while
lovely
playing,
voice, yeah.
and in practicing, I definitely called Elisabeth at some point. I was like, "How do you find pitches in the middle of a piece?" Tell me what to do.
Yeah.
And how do you know if you're singing in the same octave as your instrument?
That's true. That blew my mind. Like, when I first looked at the score, I I couldn't figure out what octave I was singing.
Oh,
I'm
right.
at a piano, like, I have degrees in this. I can't do this at all. I think I emailed you and asked if it mattered what octave I sang. And they were like, no. That actually ties in nicely, because like an email like that, the first time to a composer I haven't worked with, you're wondering like, are they going to be completely laid back, or is it really important to do exactly what they wrote? And you've been like rather laid back. I think one of the first things we did in the coaching was like tell us, not that the music doesn't matter, but you told us like just let it breathe, you know, do what you want with it, to push in certain directions. And I thought that was kind of neat because we did this interview at Herchen House, and you have this interesting background that's not classically oriented. So you said that you're a singer. To clarify, she was a pop singer and wrote her own like singer-songwriter.
And also a jazz singer.
Yeah, you did an undergraduate degree in jazz vocal performance and then tried to do a trumpet program almost. But maybe you could talk about how that background is sort of that non-classical background, working in clubs and things. How has that influenced the way you write?
Not to put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, it's a good question. I think, you know, I'm sure it influences the way I write, but I don't know if I can verbalize that really well. I think what I can verbalize is how it influences the expectation of how music breathes in someone else's body and in a space and in time. And so I think, you know, with every piece that you write, the way that it moves, the way the music breathes is always different than you expect in some ways, because it's other people who are obviously doing it. And so I really think it's important to allow the musicians to find the rhythm, you know, of how the piece moves and how it breathes, it feels good to them. As long as it's not, you know, like 10 times as fast or 10 times as slow. You know, I think there's got to be some wiggle room for the composer to kind of just listen and see what feels and sounds good to the musicians who are performing it. I think that's really important. And, you know, I don't know if my performing background has something to do with it, or if it's, you know, jazz is typically a more laid-back kind of field. You know, who knows? But you know, I think mostly it's just that I want the performers to be comfortable, you know, and happy and feel the piece and make it their own. You know, that's it.
Cool. You also showed us a bit of your setup at Copeland House and how you were working on your current piece. Can you talk about that process?
It's too bad we don't have the visual.
Yeah. Well, one of the things that was very difficult for me when I transitioned out of jazz and pop songwriting into writing more classical music was the idea of capturing notes on a piece of paper in 5 lines. I mean, I had an anxiety attack about that when I started my school program. And actually ran out of the bookstore looking at the staff paper thinking I was going to have to, you know, trap all this music in the staff paper. And so, you know, I had a great teacher at that time, and she was, you know, very sympathetic to my neuroses and said, well, why don't you just get a big piece of paper and draw a picture of the piece? It's like, draw a picture, okay. And basically it was just draw graphic images, like, you know, graphics that look like what the sound you want to make or the sound that you want to happen. And it turned out to be kind of a freeing thing. It was very meditative, and so I've never really left that, actually. I mean, that was, you know, 12 years ago. And so you know, what they're talking about is a long, like, piece of newsprint roll that's like 12 feet long. And this piece that I'm working on is about 60 minutes long, and so the sections there are pictures of the sections, and you know, it's just it's a visual thing that helps me feel free when I compose. So that's.
You also had a crazy camera setup.
Oh yeah, the piano. Yeah, but yeah. So you know, the idea of being free and capturing music for me is, I think, going to be a lifelong struggle. And so one of the things that I do as a trained improviser is I sing everything. I sing musical ideas into a recording device. And I go back and listen to hours and hours of, just bits of improvisations, and I find little seeds in those recordings that I like, that I think, okay, well, I can make that into a piece, or that's an interesting idea, I can expand on that. And it's a lot of work, because it's a lot of listening, it's a lot of transcribing, but it's the way that feels best to me, because I need that kind of immediate gratification when I come up with a musical idea or something. It takes me a long time to write it in the moment, and so to capture it, and then be able to go back and listen and say, okay, well, and to judge it for its worthiness. But lately I've been actually videotaping myself improvising at the piano, and so I have a little video recorder that sits above the keyboard, so I can just, improvise a piano solo, videotape it, go back and watch these improvisations to see if there's something that I like, and if there is a section, or a lot of times it's, 7 seconds that I really like, and I have to figure out how to turn that into a piece. But it's a way for me to capture something really quickly.
You sent us an audio file, and sort of like your voice would be structured out.
Oh my
Do
goodness.
you tend to start work?
Destroy it!
I think you actually said that email.
Yeah.
Not last year.
It will self-destruct in 30 days.
But I was wondering, do you typically take those improv recordings and then edit it digitally into forming the piece a bit, or do you tend to just transcribe snippets and then go in along?
No, it's a long process. I transcribe bits, and then I take those bits and I improvise on those bits and record those improvisations, and then I layer things, and then sometimes I mess around with them, and then sometimes I throw it out and start over. So it's kind of a very layered approach to finding and tweaking the material.